Okay, if we're ready to start again. So my discussion on that point, I've just asked, I thought that it had formed part of the mandate, but maybe it was another document I saw just on a quick scan. I can't find the piece of paper that I had, but I do know that I have seen that document having been discussed by council previously and touched on. My bigger concern, though, is I can't say enough, as I did yesterday, that what a great document. And we just went through negotiations, and I find it shocking that here we are, and we're discussing a consultant's report from 2015, and yet from one of Norfolk County's own employees that did a phenomenal report, we're acting like we've never seen it before today, and that it's why has the report never been, I guess my question to you, Mr. Baird, is why has the report never been presented to council?
Mayor Chop, the report was commissioned July 2017 and updated February 2018. The former general manager of Public Works left Norfolk County midsummer, and then we were in a lame duck period. This information, to the best of my understanding, has never been formally presented to council for their information or action.
My understanding when I read that document, it was done in advance of, it was commissioned by the former general manager, yes, of Public Works, and it was done specifically because of the upcoming negotiations with CUPE. It seems highly unreasonable to say that a report would have been commissioned by Ms. Robinson, and then CUPE negotiations began months later, and say that, well, it wasn't intended for those negotiations, it was intended for 4 years from now. That's not true. It was intended for those upcoming negotiations. So in reality, that information should have been presented to council a long time ago, and that information should have formed part of the bargaining process. With regards to what Ms. Martin is talking about, though, I've got the CUPE agreement here, and I don't see any reason that some of this information, despite the fact overtime is not a requirement. Would you agree?
Mayor Chop, emergency overtime is a requirement.
Emergency overtime is, but Ms. Martin isn't talking about emergency overtime. She's talking about weekend rounds.
But weekend rounds and call-outs and so on are negotiated, and I really can't comment on that. I would have to defer to Mr. Slichenkov, and he could certainly comment on the intent of this exercise and how it would feed into the collective bargaining process last year.
Mr. Slichenkov, would you like to comment?
So I've never had any robust conversations with the previous general manager of Public Works surrounding the intent of commissioning this particular report, or whether it should or shouldn't be introduced as part of bargaining or any such specifics like that. Quite honestly, by the time the bargaining document and proposals were composed, the individual in question was no longer employed by the county. As far as collective agreement provisions, and that's where some of the aspects of the report could be operational items and suggestions that would be properly reviewed by the Public Works Department and the supervisors that run the operation, because myself or the Human Resources staff don't know what the operational necessities are. Do people need to be working at certain points in time? Do they need to be working on the weekends? Do they need to be working on the evenings? So that's something we work together with the operational folks. As far as verbiage in collective agreement is concerned, I think you referred to a couple of times to pagers and on-call protocols. Now that's something that has existed in the collective agreement, certainly predates myself by multiples of years, but is a pretty robust document of 4 to 5 pages that attempts to address an operational reality and an operational need and codify situations by which individuals need to be reached out, be able to be accessible for emergency circumstances, and the mechanisms by which they were to be compensated in exchange for those call-outs. My understanding in having conversations with the bargaining unit when I just started is we used to historically have situations where we would have very limited response from our bargaining unit surrounding coming in when there were emergencies. So it was seen as beneficial by sort of individuals who came before myself and a large majority of our senior staff to codify something like that in the collective agreement so as to make sure that when we do have emergencies or we do have a need, that we have the ability to compel those people to come in. That's separate and apart from perhaps some of the recommendations that you see in the report that are purely operational in nature and not necessarily codified in the collective agreement, and we have greater flexibility in terms of making those modifications should that be the will of council.
So I see some other hands. I just want to ask at this time, Mr. Cribbs, you were employed at the time when this report was commissioned. So to me, I see an easy $200,000 in savings here from, some of it is just from simply reordering lunch times and where people take their lunches. And it seems pretty basic. I mean, why, if Miss Robinson, who was the general manager of Public Works at the time, paid for a Norfolk County employee for a 6-month period of time to commission a fantastic report, why that report did not form part of the bargaining process as the most recent report on really an efficiency study within the Water and Wastewater Department.
Firstly, this entire line of questioning is just not part of a rate-operated budget. It's my understanding, and maybe the clerk, or I'm looking for one of the GMs who has specific recollection. I think this report's supposed to be presented to you sometime next year. Oh, sorry, this year. We're into 19 now. And I just don't think that's happened yet. I see Mr. Johnson nodding in affirmative. Mr. Griselle. Paul.
My recollection is that it came up twice in closed session with OR, once to the previous term and then again in December, and there was spring or summer of 2019.
Okay, so we are planning to present this to you. This takes some management work, and we've had considerable turnover. 2018 was a hard year in many regards. But we have a team in place, and they have this report, and it is going to be formally presented to you. Although I continue to voice my objection to discussing this because it's not properly on the agenda, there will be a way to fulsomely discuss and look at our operations, broadly speaking. We try to continue. I don't know. Sorry, I do need to properly answer your question. I was employed here at the time the report was received. I can't tell you if I was employed here at the time it was commissioned or not. I have this recollection that it was like about a 6-month thing, and I started into 17, not at the start of 7. So I don't know any more than Mr. Skluchenkov. I assume it was done, I believe it was done because we were trying to look at ourselves and find ways of self-improvement. And I agree it is a pretty good report. It does have some interesting ideas. But that is all. We've presented to you our best estimate of what it's going to cost to run the municipal water supply system in 2019. We think that's something in excess of $18 million. Last year it would have been 17.9, but a number of projects weren't able to go through, therefore we didn't issue the debt on them, therefore there weren't debt payments, ergo it sounds like it's $900,000 in savings. It isn't. Understand how false a savings that is. That's work that needs to happen, and then we're going to issue debt either in 19 or in 20, depending on what you approve. But that is not sort of found money that, we took from ratepayers without plans to spend it.
There was no suggestion that that was the case, but if we weren't paying interest on debt, that is a savings. I did ask for what that amount was. So
Correct.
the number that was given to me from Mr. Johnson was $1,947,000. If it was $50,000 from a savings on debt, that really was the number that I was offered. In fact, the first number that I quoted was $102,000 yesterday. Okay, we can move on. I'll go back to Councillor Rabbits if Councillor Martin doesn't have anything further to say, but my issue with this, and to say that it didn't form part of the discussion today, I'm going to have to disagree, because at the end of the day, there's a line for salaries, and there's a line for different, and that's what we're here to discuss. And whether it's a constituent, in terms of snowplow that brings, concerns forward, whether it's wherever the savings are that we as council feel that we can find them, that's what we need to be looking at. And even better is a report that was actually been prepared by a Norfolk County staff member that I think is fantastic. So to say that it doesn't form part of the water and wastewater discussion today, I think that's a little bit of a stretch myself. But I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Ravitz.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have a question, and I'd like to follow it with a motion. My question through the chair to our CAO. I realize we're getting a little stuck in some information. We're getting a little held up here, and I don't think we're proceeding quite at the pace many of us were anticipating coming into this budgetary discussion. I would like a refresher and your best estimate. How much money is it costing this council to run this meeting approximately every 10 minutes? How much are we spending?
Last year, we started the 2018 budget deliberations. Typically, the mayor makes opening remarks, and then so does the chief administrative officer as we present what becomes your budget to you. And last year's analysis by the finance department worked out to $6,000 per hour for to run a council meeting. It's $600 every 10 minutes. There's inflation on this year's number is higher, although we don't have the entire calculation done, but something in excess of that. So I offer this advice to you from a place of loyalty as your employee. It's more than 600. Now, that's an average council meeting. That is not a budget meeting. Those numbers are significantly higher because we have to bring in more staff. But even if you used, if you only added 2% to 600, 10% 60, a fifth, 615, if you just assume 2% inflation. And that figure was widely quoted in the media, somewhat from a couple of different perspectives. But the bottom line is, and the piece of advice I want to offer to you, we're going through this budget process together, and while much is made of this being a new council, with respect, what's also new is our relationship with you and your relationship with us. We have to learn your wants, needs, and preferences, and although you don't have to learn our preferences, it's a symbiotic relationship since we're all in this thing together. We're learning somewhere areas where you'd like more information, but information paralysis is a real thing that affects decision makers, and it is always possible to ask for more. And sometimes you need to, and other times you have adequate information. You will never get perfect information, and that always has a cost for us to obtain for you. It's $600 every 10 minutes of decision making. Last night we spent 45 minutes on a delegation that asked to save $400. We spent $2,400 of taxpayer money deciding not to give a $400 grant. So we spent 6 times the cost of a request last night. And it didn't matter whether you decided to do it or to not do it. We spent $2,400 making a $400 decision. And that is the real reason, in a fundamental sense, why you pay a team of professionals 6-figure salaries to run the corporation on a daily basis to the best of their ability, and you give us the deep strategic advice and guidance. On these budgets, this morning we spent roughly an hour on a $35,000 item. So that's about $6,000 on that 35. Maybe that's worth it, maybe it isn't. But that's a $35,000 item on an $18 million budget, proposed budget, 18.4 if we're being specific. So information paralysis is a hard thing, And I can't tell you when it's right to say, to ask for more time or more information, and when it isn't. But I would submit to you that not every item is it worth providing perfect information on, given the size and volume of the zeros we're dealing with, and the cost in staff time and in deferral of decisions to come to said decision. That's the best I have.
On
Thank
that
you.
basis, we should just approve the budget and go home for the day. Councillor Martin?
With all due respect, it is worth it for me to have these conversations in year one of our budget so that I can learn the system and move forward more efficiently, more effectively for the taxpayer in the future. So that is why I have been asking for deferral or additional information. I can appreciate, Councillor Rabbits, that you're sitting in between two seasoned politicians here, and if you are comfortable putting a dollar value on what is business as usual, then fine. But for me, it is worth it to spend the money now to learn the process appropriately, to make decisions that I am comfortable with. And we talk about wants and needs. I want to assess the needs of Norfolk County taxpayers properly on year one of this budget with full understanding so that next year we can go through and be more efficient and move through this process quicker. So for me, yes, I can respect that there is a dollar value associated with taking our time and moving through this process, but it is worth it for me if that eliminates 3 more years of this budgeting process. Thank you.
Councillor Rabbits, I see your hand. Councillor Huffman was next.
Okay. Yes, in regards to this, this is not moving forward the way I anticipated it would move forward. I do need to be very clear in terms of transparency that I think that I respect the process and I respect the fact that we have people who are more expert in the area of finance and wastewater than I am. I understand I'm a new councillor, but I also understand that I need to have some trust and faith in the process. I also need to be respectful of the fact that while we are debating this, we are costing taxpayers money. We're trying to save money, but we are spending money. I do not have any kind of agenda here. I want to learn, but I want to move forward, and I want to be respectful of that. And to imply that if that any council members who are not in favor of deferral are not being as transparent and as open to the process, I find inappropriate. And I just want to say that I think as a group, we need to move forward and let's concentrate on the bigger picture.
To clarify, there's no, I'm not insinuating that anyone is not being transparent, but it's about learning the process and having staff who we do trust to provide content.
Councillor Huffman.
Can we please follow order? I believe Councillor Rabbits was next.
He is next, but there's
Okay.
obviously a
Thank you.
discussion here.
Point of privilege, please. I was recognized by the chair. I had asked a question. I had indicated that I had a motion to follow that question, and I was interrupted by our mayor, our deputy mayor, and then we had other councillors being recognized before I had an opportunity to respond to our CAO, and I would like to thank you for providing us with that detailed response to my original question. I did not want to interrupt anyone. You've had an opportunity to say your piece. I guess the conch shell's back in my seat, and I would like to put a motion forward, please.
Please.
I agree that the report that we are considering, which was pertaining to rates and the RRO, is totally relevant to this budgetary discussion. My concern is it has not been formally presented to this council, and that needs to take place. And I would like to move to expedite the presentation of this report formally. I don't want to wait till the summer. I'd like to see it in the spring. I would like to ask staff for a date when we could reasonably expect to have what I will call the Walton report presented to this council.
If it is acceptable unto council, we'd like to suggest the last CIC in February, so it comes to a committee. That's roughly 6 weeks from now. It gives some time for some analysis. The report's obviously done. It's in your hands as a practical matter, but it gives some time to put some thought around the current management team's thoughts and assessments of same, and also gives some time to, quite frankly, pass these budgets. If I could find the calendar, but whatever the last CIC in February is, would be our suggestion.
Thank you. I'd like to move to receive the report at that time, and I would like to add that I would like to see more detailed recommendations provided by our staff in response to this report. I don't only want to see the recommendations that are contained within this report. I would like to see some additional recommendations in response to this consultant's report included in that presentation, please. That's the motion.
Mr. Clerk, did you get all of that?
Yes, Madam Mayor.
So- Okay, so if we could get a seconder, is that,
Councilor Columbus would like to second that. I think Councilor Rabbit is right on
okay,
time.
could we just get you to repeat that motion?
That the OR report be presented to council and committee on February 19th, 2019, and that staff be directed to provide additional analysis and considerations in respect to the report.
Okay, any discussion on the motion? Okay, and we can take a vote. All in favor? Carried. Next item?
Right now, we're still on page 3-6. If there's no further questions related to the water operations side of the house, we'll move to 3-7, which is the wastewater operations. And just as an overall summary for the wastewater operations, the proposed 2019 operating budget is $9.7 million, an increase of $271,900, and basically a 2.9% increase also. The major budget driver that in this area is the fleet equipment rental charges, and I believe that it's not the fleet equipment rental. It is, if you look back again at the administration, the water and sewer administration side of the house, that budget has increased $310,000, and this is the share for the wastewater of that administration cost. So if you have any questions regarding any of the detailed line items, again, we'd be pleased to help answer any questions or clarify anything.
No questions on 3-7?
Okay, thank you. I believe on 3.8 that we've had a thorough discussion on both the council-approved initiative and the NBI, so we can move to the appendices tab. The first appendix is obviously the recommended rates for 2019. These will be revised based on the changes so far and any further changes council does make, and we will come back and provide you with the new rates. So starting on page 4-3, as we mentioned earlier, staff, along with financial services from Public Works and financial services staff, conducted a thorough review of all the user fees for water and wastewater. These are recommended rates. There's no recommended subsidies for these rates, as it's felt most of the fees are a direct benefit to the users. You'll notice a number of them have increased or decreased substantially, but the overall net impact, if you use occurrences from 18, is approximately $22,600. We re-looked at the history of occurrences, and they have been slightly reduced for 2019 for a net net increase in miscellaneous user fees, just over $12,000. So if you have any questions regarding any specific fees, Mr. Baird or Mr. Johnson should, we can answer your questions.
Councillor Martin.
I wondered if staff could please clarify increases of upwards of 40% on operators driving to the property. Could someone maybe just spend some time educating me on that and how that equates to a 40% increase, please?
Through the mayor to Mayor Chop to Councillor Martin. On the right-hand side, we have some comments regarding the reasons for some of the increases. And previous fees, when they were being calculated, did include actually any of the staff time for the operators to drive out to the properties. I think that's the majority of the costs. Mr. Baird may have, or Ms. Davis might have more information related to that.
Mayor Chop, that is correct. Previously, the operator time, the driving time was not factored into that rate. It has been done so for 2019.
Any further questions? Okay, I have a question. Environmental information requests for property. That is the Water and Waste Department that is performing that?
Which item was that again, Mayor Chop? I'm sorry.
4-5, just under miscellaneous charges. Environmental information requests.
To the mayor. Yeah, this service is performed by the environmental service technologist in the office, and it is to confirm if there's any water or wastewater services to a property. Usually these come in from a lawyer who might be representing just the sale of a property.
Okay. Perfect. Thanks, Stephanie. I just, another one that jumps out at me, contractor water samples just below that first sample. It says service time for work completed by support services clerk and financial services accounts receivable clerk were not considered in prior calculation. The price went up. Did we have to hire somebody else?
Madam Mayor, no, that they, again, just like the previous question that Councillor Martin had mentioned, the fees to make it 100% cost recovery, we had neglected to include this, the time the support services clerk and financial services staff are required for that, to undertake that first sample piece.
I just find if it wasn't 100% cost recovery before, I guess for myself, I have a difficult time reconciling if we haven't had to hire any new members in the water and waste department, how it is that the cost went up despite the fact that it's...
The cost went up, Your Worship. These are existing staff that work in the administration office, and they just did that as a function of their job, and it was determined through the user fee schedule. We want, if it's 100% cost recovery, we want to make sure that the user is paying 100% of the cost, and that's what's been done here. So that additional time that was not being accounted for previously.
Okay, I still have a hard time reconciling that, but... Any further questions, Councillor Columbus?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Page 4.5, and my question's about rain barrels, just before your question there, just after it. It talks about these rain barrels going up 33.87%. Do we pass out many of these rain barrels at that price, or is there a stack of them that we have to get rid of? I haven't seen many of those plastic rain barrels around, and should we actually be in that business?
Yeah. Through the mayor, Stephanie's just reminding me, we order about 50 a year, but they're stored in the back office, and we order them, and they go out within that calendar year. It's about 50. And it, as indicated, the delivery charges for the trucking has increased, so we're passing that on within that price.
Pleased to hear that they are utilized. Thank you.
Any further questions? Kathy, I'll turn it back over to you.
So through you, Madam Mayor, that wraps up the rate-supported budget. We've had some really good discussion, and we have some good takeaways. We will calculate what the rate will be for the water and wastewater users as soon as we can, and we'll present that to council, and for, do we do the bylaw? We can't do the bylaw yet. So we would have to produce the bylaw at our next council meeting. And however, I don't want to leave the rate budget without any last-minute thoughts. If there isn't any, we could maybe take a quick break and move into capital.
Okay, any further questions? I just have one, if we could go back to the property tax issue. I still struggle, and maybe if you could just explain to me how water and waste, how that allocation of money, it's really being allocated to the levy, is it not? That tax revenue off of Port Rowan?
You are correct, Madam Mayor. The charge would go to the tax operating budget.
So the water and waste users are, in a sense, subsidizing the operating levy?
I would respectfully disagree with that statement. Basically, what we're doing is we're trying to capture all the costs related to water and wastewater in the water and wastewater budget. So the taxes related to land used to treat water and wastewater would have to be charged, and that would be charged back to us.
So who, on all the buildings that are used for sporting and so on, how is that's charged in the operating levy? We're using one to subsidize the other.
Yes, there are certain properties that are taxed, and we do charge the levy for, if there's commercial activity, there's other requirements. Sue would be able to better answer those questions on what the characteristics are in order to actually have taxes charged. So yes, there are property taxes charged to the property tax levy.
And just, this has always been the procedure in Norfolk County? Okay. Councillor Van Passen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Maybe we could call it a payment in lieu like the province and the feds do, and then it wouldn't be called taxes, right? It's hard to pay yourself.
Any further questions? Just on a procedural note then, for anything else that we have to do here for the rate budget, to move to approve the budget with...
Through you, it would be helpful if we took the break and then I can work out the exact motion wording with finance, and then as soon as we come back, we can have that motion put forward, just so we get the exact dollar amount.
Okay, so we'll take a break. 15 minutes? People can grab?
Lunch is here.
Oh, lunch is here, so perhaps a half an hour?